Hello everybody, welcome to Artists for Everyone. And I had a request. I actually had two requests this week. One of them was to paint a lady slipper, the spring ephemeral flower in the woods. And I need to do a little research on that and practice because I've never painted a lady slipper before. But I definitely want to do it. I love them. And I think that would be a really fun project for this time of the year. And then the other request was for kind of a dreamy landscape that's totally intuitive and just uses color straight from the palette and lets the palette sort of mix on the paper. And you know, I know I've done the tiny landscape videos many times. But this one, I use almost every color in my paint box. And it's just, I would say it's just a really good exercise for us to do. Number one, because we don't have any expectations and we can just totally become dreamy and relaxed. And then also, it teaches us about our palette and how the colors work together. And so it's a great little exercise for that. And I'm going to use my kata from Lotus Bleu Book Arts. And these, you can find them online, Lotus Bleu Book Arts. And blue is spelled B-L-U. And they're not terribly expensive. The only thing is you have to order them from England. And so you do have to pay a shipping fee. And the shipping was very swift. I mean, I received it in no time at all. But the book itself was not expensive. I want to say it was 10 British pounds, 10 pounds, which is like maybe $13 or something. I don't know. I just know it wasn't terribly expensive for the quality. It's beautiful, beautiful quality. And she has many gorgeous books, but I use it for my seeing drawing practice, but I also have been using it for other things, and I've kind of flipped around in here a little bit. You know what? I'm going to use this page because the graphite on this drawing rubbed off on this page, and so if I do something bigger, it will cover that up and it won't affect my painting too much. So I have this little Japanese subway railway map, and I just use this. It's like 3 by 4 inches, I would say, or no, I'm sorry. I would say it's like 4 by, I don't know what it is. It's like 3.5 by 4.5, I guess. So you can just use a ruler or whatever you want. You can do a little bit bigger if you want to. But I like this size, and I like it because I just have this card and I can just use it to trace my pencil. And I like to give myself a little boundary. And that's the only reason why. So if you can use any watercolor paper for this. This is sort of, it's cold pressed, but I'll tell you what, it's on the side of rough. And the texture of this paper is very much like canvas. So you could even get watercolor canvas to try this on, but you could use any watercolor paper. It does not matter at all, okay? You could even use the Strathmore watercolor postcards. It would be perfect. And then I have my, my squirrel mop. And I have my Artists for Everyone palette, my beautiful, beautiful paints from Wildthorne. And if you have these, then you can follow along with me as I use them. If you do not have them, any watercolors will be fine. And that's the beauty of it, because you could truly pick up any set of paints and do this and not have to worry about what colors you have, because it's very intuitive. And then I also list substitutions for all of these colors in the description box of this video, okay? And some people have had a hard time finding that description box. And it's different on your computer and on your phone. or tablet. So basically, if you look toward the top of the video, there's like a little triangle, and if you click on that, a window opens up and it has all this information that I put in every time. So do look for that, because I always put lots of helpful things. Okay, of course I've got water and some paper towels. So the first thing that I do when I begin these, I'm going to turn my paper a little bit, is I wet the paper. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is burnish the paper, because if you have a handmade paper, the lovely woman who creates these books told me a little secret, and that is with any handmade paper, to burnish it lightly with a smooth polished stone. And it really does change the way the paper accepts paint. It's beautiful. And it's just sort of a lovely practice. So I'm just smoothing the paper with this stone. And think of the energy, too, of the stone going into the paper. It's beautiful. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I wet my paper. And the reason I do this is because the paper becomes more receptive to paint and the paints will move freely on the paper, okay? I probably won't wet it all the way down, but about 3/4. Yeah, about 2/3 of the way down. I want the bottom to be a little bit darker. So, and paint will run down there anyways. So I'll just do about 3/4 or 2/3. But I definitely want a nice glaze of water on my paper, okay? And don't worry at all if you go out of the lines, that does not matter. But this just sort of gives me a boundary and I like it. And then before I begin, and I need to find my spray bottle. Oh, here it is. So I like to wet my paints when I'm painting like this. So I just spritz it with water. I spritz my palette with water, and then it just sort of softens everything up and makes them ready to go. All right? So I've got my wet paper, and I am not going to be traditional here, although I am going to start with the Cobalt Bleu Primaire because I love it so. And I'm just going to drop it down on the paper. And I want to use plenty of color in this exercise. I am not trying to be pastel or soft whatsoever, because I want it to have atmosphere. And I'm going to drop in some raw umber. See how I'm just dropping it in, and I'm letting these paints mix on the paper. And wow, what a gorgeous gray that I get, you know, and then this really deep blue over here. So I'm just moving it around and just letting it mix and mingle on the paper. And then I think I'll add just a little bit of wood violet right up in here. Look at that. So the most thrilling part of this, quite honestly, is just watching what the paints do. I mean, it is just, and as you watch it, it sort of leads you to the next place, if that makes sense. I'm going to use a little bit of crème brûlée here on the blue and let it meet up towards that raw umber. I'll add a little bit more blue to it. So one color leads you to the next color. It's just dreamy, and you shouldn't think too much about it. You should just look at your palette and say, what do I feel like next? And if your paint's ever going somewhere that you don't wish it to go at the moment, you can always sweep a paintbrush through and it lifts some color. So now I'm thinking more of the raw umber. And maybe a little bit of viridian in there. Just drop it in. Letting the paints work their magic, because beautiful watercolors, watercolor is a magical medium. And when you allow them to express themselves in their own way, with their own voice, no matter what paints you're using, you achieve results that you couldn't have possibly dreamed up. And they're really wonderful. I'm going to go with some wood rose right in here. Water rose, I should say. Now, if I start to get too wet, again, I can take my paintbrush, dry it off, and just sort of wick some of that moisture up. Dry it off again, and wick up a little more. Because if you get too wet, then your paints just sort of pool around and they don't really react to one another. A little more raw umber here. I see this shape and it just reminds me of where a tree might be. And I think I'll add some ochre léger to the bottom side and some mimosa to the top side. Again, I'm getting water here, so I'm just wicking it up with my paintbrush. Little viridian. A little more raw umber. Let me take a look. I'm loving it. Okay. So I think over on this side, I'm going to drop in more of the raw umber. And then I want to think about my foreground, and I think I'm going to start with the tiniest touch of mimosa. Just right there, especially where that water rose is. And then I'm going to move into my ochre léger or yellow ochre. And then I'm going to pick up some Cienne Brûlée. And pull it down. And I think I might pull some Cienne Brûlée over here too. And then maybe a little bit of raw umber toward the bottom. And then flick my paintbrush through a little bit. Soften it in. I'm really loving the way the viridian looks with the raw umber here. It's just beautiful. And I love that little bit of wood rose, and I'm just going to enhance that water rose. I always call it wood rose. I'm sorry about that. And then I'll go for a little more ochre léger in here. See how I'm just going along and regarding how the paint is moving and what it's doing, and just adding adding to it as I go. Now I really love this area in here, and I think I want to just make it a little bit more dramatic. So I'm going to drop some raw umber in. And maybe just a tiny bit of Viridian into it. A bit of ochre léger in between. So if I see my paints spreading where I don't want them to go, I can just gently lift them with a dry brush. Damp brush, not dry brush. Oh, I think I got an ant on my leg. It's really spring. And no painting is complete for me, ever, without a little gold mica. And I'm thinking it deserves to be right here. I'm going to drop it in where this meets the field, just to give it a little bit of glimmer. Okay. It's very wet there, so see how I'm just using my brush to just sort of wipe back and forth. And add in more ochre léger. Now I want to anchor this tree, so I'm going to use the raw umber and just touch some to the bottom of the tree here and there. Maybe a little more gold now that it's starting to dry. If I just touch my brush, it gives me a nice little line, and I sort of brought it up in here. So pretty. And then where the wood rose is, I think I'll add just a touch of buff Titane to the top of that. Bring it up. And the same over here. Let's give them a little frosting. And I'm still, my eye is really drawn to the wood violet. And normally, maybe that's okay, but I think I am going to add a little more of the raw umber over here, just to bring it down just a little notch, because it's drawing my eye to it too much, and I don't want that necessarily. I want it to be a complete picture. I need to deepen this in here. So you see how I'm just going back and forth and kind of looking at what I have and seeing where my eyes go and what it is that I'm seeing here. I mean, I'm seeing sort of this magical dreamscape. Yeah, pretty. I might add a little bit of the Viridian over here just to balance, because I see it over here and I just sort of want it to flow through. And these are things we learn by doing. So we learn by paying attention to the world, and we learn by actually putting paint on paper. And the more we do these, the more we start to see. I want a little more wood rose. Water rose. God, I just can't get away from that. Ooh, just that color, so pretty. A little bit over here. And I'm still wanting to bring down that wood violet a little bit. Now it almost looks like flowering trees back there. So pretty. There. Maybe just a tiny bit of cobalt over in this corner. Or Bleu Primaire. Such a pretty name. Bleu Primaire. I love the names. And just a touch more gold. There. So this paint box, you know, and then the colors that I've listed for you in the description box are really useful for many, many different subjects. They're just, that's why we chose them. These were specifically chosen because they're very useful for many, many subjects. What is missing from them is a really vibrant red. And that's my personal aesthetic. If you want a really vibrant red and you're painting them, by all means, use them. I love what other artists do with bright red. I don't know. Maybe I'm afraid of it. But I hope what you can see is that these paints, when you start to use them all together and watch how they mix and mingle, they just have a really beautiful quality about how they mix. And you really can't combine colors incorrectly with these paints when you're working in this style and you're sort of doing this dreamy, intuitive work. You really can't go wrong here. And it's so wet that I can just continue to add little touches here and there, and it's just beautiful. So there is my little dreamy landscape. And by special request. So that brings me to this other thing I wanted to say, is that if you ever do have requests, please leave them in the comments, and I'll have a running list, you know. I usually have lots of ideas, but you never know, I might be having an off week and not have a great idea, and I can pull from the list. And also, I would love to know what you're interested in. And I can make these videos as time goes on. So this is a dreamy landscape using every color in the paint box. And it was super fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Again, there aren't many rules. My only thing I would say is that to wet your paper, and just to follow your eye and follow your heart, and just, it doesn't have to look like this. You could do the ocean, you could do a rocky cliff, you could do a meadow, you could do winter with birch trees and a deer. I mean, whatever it is that speaks to your heart is what will come out. And the more you do of them, the more diverse they will be, and you'll find all different types of landscapes that come forth from you, and it's super, super fun. So that's it for today. Thank you very, very much for being here, and I will be back in a few days with another video. Thanks.